My name is Birgit Walters. I'm 32 years old. People think lawsuits start with money. Mine didn't. Mine started with the way my mother would smile while handing me a plate of food, then bring it up 2 months later like I'd signed a contract the moment I swallowed. In our house, love was never just love, it was a loan, and my parents kept receipts the way other people kept family photos. If I asked for a ride to school, it wasn't, "Sure, honey." It was, "I hope you remember this when we need something." If I needed new shoes, it wasn't, "Let's go shopping." It was, "Do you know how hard we work to keep you clothed?" Even basic parenting came with a price tag, and the cruelest part was, the debt was never equal. Because my little brother Ryan, 3 years younger, was never expected to pay anything back. Ryan was the son, and the rest of us just orbited around him. My parents weren't poor. They both had decent jobs, steady paychecks, a comfortable enough life, but the way they spent money would have made you think we were royalty, at least when it came to Ryan. Private soccer training, expensive weekend camps, top-of-the-line cleats that changed every season, new clothes, every time a new trend appeared at his school. Meanwhile, if I wanted something beyond the bare minimum, the answer was always one of two things. "You don't need it," or the classic, "Get a job." So I did. At 15, while Ryan spent weekends traveling for tournaments or hanging out with friends, I was bussing tables at a local diner. The uniform smelled like fryer oil no matter how many times I washed it. My hands stayed raw from dishwater and bleach. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And there was a strange kind of pride that came with that, because every tip I tucked into my apron felt like proof that I could survive without begging for approval. That job led to another, then another. I learned how to juggle schoolwork with double shifts, how to study while my feet throbbed, how to smile at strangers, while my own family treated my effort like a personality flaw. By the time I graduated high school, I had savings. Not a fortune, but enough to pay for community college without asking my parents for a single cent. I still remember my father watching me count my money at the kitchen table and saying, half joking, half bitter, "Look at you, acting like you're better than everyone because you don't need help." I laughed it off back then. I didn't understand yet that my independence wasn't impressive to them. It was threatening. College made the divide worse. I took classes during the day, worked nights, and squeezed sleep into the cracks between responsibilities. Ryan, on the other hand, found himself, which apparently meant enrolling at a decent university, lasting one semester, then dropping out because he didn't vibe with the professors. After that, he bounced through odd jobs, quitting every time someone told him to show up on time. My parents always had excuses ready. "He's figuring it out. He has potential. He's not like you, Birgit. You've always been intense." Intense. That word became their favorite way to describe me, as if being responsible was some sort of irritating personality quirk. Anytime I achieved something, it was brushed off like it was nothing. But if Ryan did the bare minimum, made it through a week at a new job, applied for a program, talked about going back to school, it was treated like a miracle. By 24, I landed a solid job in tech. It wasn't flashy at first, but it was stable, and I worked harder than I ever had. I learned everything I could, took on extra tasks, stayed late when no one asked me to. Within a year, my paycheck grew enough that I started looking at houses. Quietly. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Ryan. I didn't even tell most of my friends. I was afraid the moment I said it out loud, someone would laugh, or worse, someone would claim it. Every open house felt surreal. The smell of fresh paint, the staged furniture, the quiet hum of other people's dreams floating through hallways. It made my chest tight with a kind of hope I wasn't used to. When I finally closed on my first home, my hands shook as I signed the paperwork. Not because it was scary, but because it felt impossible. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a showpiece, but it was mine. Every brick, every nail, every square foot. I had earned it. No one could twist that into a favor. And still, some part of me wanted my family to be proud. That should have been my second warning sign. The first was the unspoken rule I'd lived under my whole life. Nothing good was allowed to belong to me without permission. I invited my parents and Ryan over for dinner as a surprise. I cleaned the kitchen until it shined. I cooked an actual meal, real food, not takeout eaten over the sink like I'd done for years. I even bought a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford, because I wanted the night to feel special. The moment my mother stepped inside, her face didn't light up. It tightened. Her eyes swept over the living room the way a landlord checks for damage. My father let out a low whistle and joked, "What, did you win the lottery?" Ryan barely said hello. He just wandered off, opening doors, looking into rooms like he was measuring the place. The only person who seemed genuinely happy for me was my aunt, who'd tagged along. She kept saying, "Birgit, this is incredible. You did this all by yourself?" My mother smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. At the table, the comments started. "It's nice," my mom said, slicing her chicken like she was punishing it. "But don't you think it's a bit much for someone your age?" My dad added, "Yeah, you must be doing very well." Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Must be nice." I felt the air shift, like the room had turned into a courtroom and I'd just unknowingly taken the stand. I tried to keep it light. I worked hard. I saved. That's all. Ryan's mouth twisted. "You probably could have helped out with other things instead of splurging on this." I put my fork down slowly. "Other things like what?" My mother looked at me like I was pretending not to understand. "Your brother's been talking about going back to school," she said, voice sweet, almost rehearsed. "And you know how expensive that is." Ryan nodded like he was giving a speech. "It's not like you don't have the money." My chest went cold. Not once had they asked if I needed help. Not once had they offered anything when I was scraping by. But the moment I had something to show for myself, they were already mentally dividing it up, assigning it, like my life was a family fund. I kept my voice steady. "I worked for this house. I didn't take anything from you. Why should I be expected to pay for Ryan's choices?" My father's jaw tightened. Family helps family. Ryan stared at me like I'd betrayed him personally, like I'd stolen something from him by daring to succeed. And my mother leaned forward, voice quiet and sharp. "Don't be selfish, Birgit." Selfish. The same word she'd used when I refused to hand over half my paycheck at 16. The same word she'd used when I wouldn't co-sign a car loan for Ryan at 21. I felt something shift inside me, a slow, bitter clarity. To them, my success wasn't mine. It was a debt they intended to collect. I ended the dinner early, polite, clipped, controlled. My hands were shaking while I stacked plates, but I refused to let them see it. As they left, my mother hugged me, tight, performative, and whispered into my ear like a warning dressed up as affection. "We'll talk about this again." I watched their car pull away, my porch light spilling onto the driveway like a spotlight. And in that moment, standing in the doorway of the home I'd built out of sheer, stubborn survival, I had a thought that made my stomach drop. They weren't impressed by what I'd achieved. They were calculating what they could take. The first few days after that dinner were quiet. Too quiet. I told myself it would blow over, that they'd cool off, accept my answer, move on like adults. I wanted to believe that version of my parents, the one who could hear the word no without turning it into a declaration of war. I was wrong. The calls started slowly, almost politely. My mother rang one afternoon while I was at work, her voice syrupy. "Ryan's been looking at classes," she said, as if we were just chatting. It's such a shame when people in the family have the means to help and choose not to. I didn't respond. A few days later, my dad called. "You know," he said, clearing his throat, "we sacrificed a lot for you growing up." I nearly laughed. Nearly. Then came the follow-ups, the reminders, the guilt wrapped in concern. "Ryan's feeling really discouraged. He thinks you don't believe in him. Is money really worth tearing the family apart?" Every conversation ended the same way, me defending my right to keep what I'd earned, them framing it as betrayal. And Ryan? Ryan didn't call at first. He posted vague quotes on social media. "Some people forget where they came from. Families should support each other." Sad emojis. Comment sections full of sympathy from people who didn't know me, didn't know the truth. I could feel the narrative shifting, quietly, deliberately, until I wasn't just the sister who said no. I was the villain. The explosion came one Sunday afternoon. Ryan texted me, "We need to talk, come by." For a split second, I hoped, stupidly, that maybe he wanted to apologize, or at least explain himself without our parents pulling the strings. When I walked into my childhood home, the kitchen table was already set. Not for dinner, for negotiation. Papers were spread out neatly. College brochures, tuition breakdowns, charts. A folder labeled with my name sat at the center like an accusation. My parents were there, so was Ryan. I stared at the table, then at them. "What is this?" My mother folded her hands. "We've put together a reasonable plan." "A plan?" I echoed. Ryan leaned forward, completely unashamed. "It just makes sense. You're doing well. This helps everyone." I flipped open the folder. It was a payment schedule. 4 years. Monthly contributions. Numbers calculated down to the dollar. How much I should pay for his education. I laughed, out loud. You made a payment plan, I said slowly. For me to fund your life? My mother's expression hardened. This isn't funny, Birgit. This is his future. And what about mine? I asked. Ryan scoffed. You already got yours. The house, the job. Why do you get everything while I'm stuck? That was the moment something in me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I'm not giving you a cent, I said, standing. Not now, not ever. My father slammed his hand on the table. Don't be dramatic. I walked out. I thought that would be the worst of it. 2 weeks later, I opened my mailbox and found a letter that made my hands shake. It was from a lawyer. My parents were suing me. The claim was dressed up in legal language. Something about willfully depriving a dependent family member of opportunity. Ryan was listed as the plaintiff. I was painted as someone who had flaunted wealth while blocking his future. They even demanded a settlement. The amount? Almost exactly the total tuition costs they'd shown me at the kitchen table. I sat there rereading the letter, my coffee going cold, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. This wasn't a bluff. They were really doing this. From that day on, the pressure became relentless. My mother called daily, crying one moment, furious the next. You're tearing this family apart. Ryan is devastated. How will you live with yourself if he fails? Ryan leaned into it. More posts, more pity. Friends commenting things like stay strong and family can be cruel. At a cousin's birthday party, my aunt pulled me aside. I just wish you and Ryan could work this out, she said gently. Your parents told me you refused to help him after buying that big house. That's when I realized how thoroughly the story had been rewritten. Years of me working since I was a teenager, gone. Ryan's failed chances, erased. All that mattered was that I said no. I stopped going to family events after that. It was unbearable hearing whispers, feeling eyes on me, knowing I'd already been judged. One night, Ryan showed up at my house, unannounced. He rang the doorbell until I opened it, standing there with that smug half-smile like he'd rehearsed this moment. You know you're going to lose, right? He said casually. Mom and Dad have a lawyer. The family's on our side. You should just pay now and save yourself the embarrassment. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. You're not entitled to my money, I said. You've had chance after chance. Ryan laughed. You only got here because you had it easier than me. Easier. I stared at him, stunned by the audacity. If you think I had it easy, I said quietly, you weren't paying attention. I went back inside and locked the door. From that night on, things escalated fast. My parents stopped calling me directly and started using other people, relatives, family friends, even my grandmother. Sweetheart, she said once, voice trembling. Maybe if you helped Ryan just a little, this could all go away. The lawsuit moved forward. I hired my own lawyer. Seeing my parents' names on legal documents, cold, black ink, was devastating in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was betrayal formalized. Then came the voicemail that changed everything. It was from my realtor. She sounded uneasy. Birgit, she said, I got an odd inquiry about your house. Someone asking if it might be available soon, because the current owner might not be there much longer. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a stranger. It was my mother. She'd called pretending to be a family friend, hinting that I might lose the house and that it would be a shame if it went to waste when another family member could use it. They weren't just trying to bleed me. They were trying to take my home. Sitting at my kitchen table that night, staring at the walls I'd fought so hard to own, I finally understood something terrifyingly clear. This was never just about Ryan's education. It was about control, and they were willing to destroy me to keep it. After I found out my mother had called my realtor, something inside me went very still. The anger didn't explode, the panic didn't scream. It settled, cold, focused, clear. For the first time, I stopped asking why. I stopped replaying conversations, stopped wondering what I could have said differently to make them see reason. Because the truth finally crystallized into something undeniable. They weren't misunderstanding me. They were targeting me. So I disappeared. Not physically, but emotionally. I stopped answering calls. I didn't respond to texts. I forwarded every message, every letter, every voicemail straight to my lawyer. If my parents or Ryan wanted to speak to me, they could do it through legal channels. And the silence did something interesting. They took it as weakness. I could tell. The tone shifted from outrage to confidence. They thought I was backing down, that I'd realized I couldn't win and was quietly preparing to fold. I let them believe that. While they celebrated too early, I rebuilt. The first place I reclaimed ground was work. I'd been barely holding it together for weeks, zoning out in meetings, missing small deadlines, carrying the weight of a lawsuit I never asked for. One afternoon, my manager asked me into his office. I braced for bad news. Instead, he shut the door and said, "I don't know what's going on in your personal life, but I know you're good at what you do. If you can focus, I want you on a high visibility project." It felt like someone had cracked open a window in a suffocating room. I threw myself into that project. Long hours, obsessive attention to detail. I didn't just want to succeed, I needed to remind myself who I was when no one was sabotaging me. The project worked. A few weeks later, I was offered a promotion. Along with it came a raise big enough to make me breathe again. My savings grew. My safety net thickened. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't vulnerable anymore. Meanwhile, my lawyer was quietly dismantling their case. He pulled Ryan's employment records, his previous college transcripts, messages where my parents openly admitted they'd coddled him too much. Every document told the same story, a pattern of indulgence followed by blame, always directed at me. I didn't celebrate. I archived. Outside of work, I rebuilt myself in smaller ways. I went back to the gym, not to punish my body, but to release the pressure coiled inside it. I started cooking again. Real meals, not whatever I could grab between panic attacks. Chopping vegetables became oddly therapeutic, proof that I could still care for myself. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted from, the ones who knew me before my family decided I was the enemy. People who didn't need explanations, who didn't flinch when I said, "I'm in a legal fight with my parents." Slowly, I felt human again. Then my lawyer called with a tone I hadn't heard before. Excitement. "Birgit," he said, "they made a mistake." Their attorney had accidentally copied him on an internal email chain during discovery. Buried in the thread was a message from my mother that made my pulse spike. "We need to make sure Birgit's house is included in any settlement. Ryan already has a realtor friend lined up to list it as soon as it's signed over. This is the cleanest way to give him a fresh start." There it was, in writing. The lawsuit wasn't about opportunity. It wasn't about education. It was about transferring my home to my brother. My lawyer laughed softly. "This changes everything." But I didn't want to just win. I wanted to end it. Around the same time, work offered me another step up. This time, a cross-department leadership role. More income, more influence, more connections. I accepted immediately. And with that leverage, I hired a private investigator. Nothing illegal, nothing invasive. I just wanted facts. I wanted the full picture. 2 weeks later, a thick folder landed on my desk. Inside were screenshots from Ryan's private social media, trips, expensive gadgets, test drives for cars, all while he claimed he was barely scraping by. There were also records showing my parents had tried something similar years ago, pressuring my late aunt to sell them land below market value. A quiet family scandal no one talked about anymore. This wasn't new behavior. It was a pattern. And then came the final piece. A legally obtained recording from a public place, a bar. Ryan bragging to a friend. "I finally figured out how to cash in on having a successful sister," he said. "Mom and Dad are handling it. Once the house is mine, I'll sell it and be set." I listened to it 3 times. By the third, I felt nothing but clarity. They thought they were closing in. In reality, they'd handed me everything I needed. I waited. Not because I was afraid, but because timing mattered. The court date loomed. Pre-trial conference approaching. A room where both sides would lay their strongest cards on the table. That would be my stage. They still thought I was silent because I was weak. They were wrong. I was silent because I was ready. The pretrial conference was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. Ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of day where most people worry about traffic or lunch plans. For me, it felt like walking into the final act of a story I'd been trapped in for most of my life. When I entered the conference room, my parents were already there. My mother sat upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, wearing the same calm expression she used whenever she believed she was in control. My father stared at the table, jaw tight, like a man bracing for impact but unwilling to admit it. Ryan sat between them, relaxed, smug. He leaned back in his chair, one ankle resting on his knee, like he was waiting to sign paperwork for a prize he'd already won. When he saw me, he smiled, not warmly, not nervously, but confidently, as if my presence was just a formality. That smile almost made me laugh. The mediator began with routine pleasantries, then nodded to my lawyer. We'd agreed beforehand. No speeches, no emotion, no defending my character. Just facts. My lawyer slid a thin binder across the table toward their side. "This," he said calmly, "is documentation of my client's financial independence beginning at age 15." Ryan scoffed quietly. My lawyer didn't react. Employment records, tax returns, tuition payments, proof of property purchase. You'll notice, he continued, flipping to a highlighted page, that not a single cent of parental contribution appears anywhere in these documents. My mother's posture shifted slightly. Ryan leaned forward, frowning now. And here, my lawyer said, turning another page, is an email from the plaintiffs themselves confirming that the primary objective of this lawsuit is the transfer of my client's home to a third party. The color drained from my mother's face so quickly, it was almost startling. My father's lips pressed into a thin line. Ryan's confidence faltered. He craned his neck, trying to read the page. My lawyer wasn't finished. And lastly, he said, opening his laptop, we have an audio recording. Ryan's voice filled the room. Once the house is mine, I'll sell it and be set for years. Silence. Not awkward silence. Not tense silence. The kind of silence where the truth lands so hard it knocks the air out of the room. The mediator cleared his throat and looked at my parents' lawyer. Do you wish to respond? Their lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently to my parents. My mother shook her head, eyes darting toward me, not in anger, not in confidence. In fear. Ryan muttered something under his breath. My father snapped a glare at him so sharp it felt overdue by about 20 years. Finally, their lawyer straightened. We'd like a moment to discuss this privately. They left the room. I sat still, hands folded, heart steady. For the first time since this nightmare began, I knew, without a single doubt, that it was over. 10 minutes later, they returned. We're prepared to withdraw the lawsuit, their lawyer said stiffly. Each party covers their own legal fees. My lawyer didn't even look at me before responding. That's unacceptable. He continued evenly. Given the evidence of malicious intent, we will proceed with a countersuit unless we receive a written apology, a public retraction of defamatory statements, and full reimbursement of my client's legal costs. Ryan turned to my parents. We're not doing that. Yes, my mother snapped quietly, cutting him off. We are. And just like that, it ended. By the end of the week, the apology letter landed in my inbox. Awkward, carefully worded, hollow. The reimbursement check cleared 2 days later. But that wasn't the part that mattered. The real shift happened when I sent copies of the apology and evidence to the relatives who'd iced me out. No explanation, no commentary. Just the truth. The phone calls started almost immediately. Aunts, cousins, people who suddenly wanted to check in. I didn't answer most of them. I didn't need to. The fallout spread faster than I expected. Family group chats exploded. Screenshots circulated. Every time someone tried to defend my parents, someone else dropped a quote from the email or mentioned the recording. The image my parents had carefully curated for decades cracked in public. They stopped showing up to gatherings, not because they weren't invited, but because they couldn't stand the questions. My mother withdrew. My father grew quiet, smaller somehow. And Ryan? Without the house, without the settlement, without the illusion of victory, he had nothing. I heard he moved out briefly, then returned when reality caught up. The smugness disappeared. When our paths crossed at unavoidable family events, he barely looked at me. The check covered every legal expense. The apology letter went into a drawer, not because I needed it, but because it was proof. Proof that no matter how much they tried to rewrite history, there was a moment they had to admit they were wrong. I didn't reconcile. I didn't forgive for the sake of peace. I kept building my life. My career continued to grow. My circle stayed small and solid, and my house, my home, remained exactly where it belonged. Sometimes in the quiet evenings, I think about that first dinner, the way I hoped they'd be proud, the way their masks slipped the moment they saw what I'd built without them. And I realized the real victory wasn't winning in court. It was proving, finally, undeniably, that I never needed them to succeed, and they could never take that away from me.